Hello, today is Monday, September 29th, 2025. I don't want to barge into the American politics. I am trying to be neutral, but this article was shared by one of my friends, John Jackson. I'd like to read this article to be balanced on the American politics. I heard that if you post a negative view on the U.S. government, your visa will be rejected. So that I don't want to risk my chance to get a visa to America, even though all Koreans are allowed to enter America on a tourist visa of 90 days. Sometimes some of them are rejected because of their political views. I don't want to risk that. If you land on San Francisco and you are rejected by the ICE or the Homeland Security staff, then it's bummer, right? You waste your time and money. You have to return to Korea, so that's quite a risky. I don't want to wade into the risky, shallow waters. But let's read these articles to see what is going on in America. Hey, Trump, I don't have any remorse against you. I just want to be balanced. I want to have a good, balanced view on American politics. This article is from, and also I would like to read an English article so that I could practice English. That's main purpose. It's purely academic on my part, right? I read uh, various stuff on the internet and also through the books. So I'm just English learner. It's a purely academic effort. Republicans and Democrats and independents united against Trumpism. Trumpism, right? Trumpism. Invading our own cities, how Trump turns protest into enemy territory by Tony Pentimali. Donald Trump has ordered the U.S. military into Portland with instructions to use full force if necessary. According to Politico and the Washington Post, the other was tied to protecting immigration. The order was tied to protecting immigration and customs enforcement facilities, ICE, right? Immigration and Customs Enforcement facilities and confronting what the president labeled domestic terrorists. This is no longer rhetoric. Armed vehicles are stationed at federal buildings, and Portland's mayor confirmed a sudden influx of unrequested federal agents. The president of the United States has deployed troops against his own people. Portland officials made clear the city did not want this. Mayor Keith Wilson warned the presence of troops would make things more dangerous. Governor Tina Kotek called it an unprecedented escalation that ignores state authority. What the White House frames as security is, on the ground, an occupation imposed over local objection. For months, Trump has described his opponents as enemies. He has repeatedly branded the radical left as domestic terrorists, collapsing the distinction between political opposition and actual violent threat. Right? That's good expression, right? Collapsing the distinction between political opposition and actual violent threat. When that language is paired with real troop deployments, it becomes more than insult. It is a recipe for treating fellow Americans as enemy combatants. That's good expression. When that language is paired with real troop deployments, it becomes more than insult. It is a recipe for treating fellow Americans as enemy combatants, right? When that language is paired with real troop deployments, it is more than insult, right? It's a recipe for treating fellow Americans as combatants. right? Enemy combatants. The Senator Jeff Merkley, warned that the Constitution does not permit the president to deploy the military against peaceful protesters. Yet, that is exactly where this rhetoric leads, to soldiers confronting citizens whose only offense is dissent. History shows how quickly this road turns bloody. At Kent State in 1970, the National Guard opened fire on unarmed students after leaders framed the anti-war movement as dangerous. Abroad, authoritarian regimes have long used the tactic of labeling political opponents as terrorists to justify repression. Mussolini's Italy equated labor strikes with subversion, while more recently Erdogan's Turkey branded journalists and teachers as terrorist sympathizers to rationalize purges and crackdowns. Whoops. Yes, here. Uh, to rationalize purges and crackdowns, and subversion. I know all of those words, but I'd like to remember them again and again. The pattern is always the same: define dissent as a terror, deploy force against it, and insist the nation's survival requires obedience. What begins as language hardens into law, and law into violence. What begins as language hardens into law, and law into violence, right? What begins as language hardens into law, and law into violence. The danger lies not only in the deployment, but in the president. Authorizing full force inside American cities normalizes a hair-trigger logic. Any escalation, a thrown bottle, a scuffle, a firework, can be recast as terrorism. Trump's words and orders guarantee that the spark will come not from constitutional restraint, but from presidential will. This is just not about Portland. It is about a strategy that treats blue states as hostile territory and dissent as treason. Families and workers now live under the shadow of a military presence in places where they once assumed the rule of law would protect their right to protest. The majority of Americans reject this path. Reuters Ipsos poll found only 38% support for deploying troops in Washington, while 46% opposed it. A Chicago Council survey reported that 70% of Americans reject using U.S. troops to suppress domestic protests. Trump's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful, but unpopular, right? Trump's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful and unpopular. That's a good expression. From the standpoint of English, right? For example, President Park's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful, but also unpopular, right? Troops are already here. Portland is not a battlefield. Protests are not enemy combatants. If Americans accept soldiers in their streets under orders of full force, then history will not just rhyme with its darkest chapters. It will repeat them. The question is no longer what Trump might do, but what Americans will do now that he has already done it. Tony Pentimali is a political analyst and commentator fighting for democracy, economic justice, and social equity. Follow him for sharp analysis and hard-hitting critiques on Facebook and Blue Sky at tonywriteshere.bsky.social. So basically, it says when the language turns into when what start what started language hardens into law and law into violence, right? Trumpism, subversion, more than insult. When the language is paired with real troop deployments, it's more than insult, right? It will subversion. It will what started as a language hardens into law and law into violence. They are not criminals. They are not enemy combatants. They are just normal citizens in America. So Tony Pentimali says the Trump is trying to suppress American opposition and label them as enemy domestic terrorists, enemy combatants, and he orders obedience among its people. So it looks like it's something similar here in Korea's political scene, right? It repeats every time in the Asian politics. It's terrible that government fights with its citizens and citizens subvert against the government. So I don't know how the America will solve this issue. I hope everything is fine and citizens regain freedom and the government regains good economy and a strong power and the cooperation with Korea. And it still allows me to visit America or to have a job in America, right? I have to retire in 3 years' time, and I'm looking for a next job because I'm still young, right? I would be 60 years old in 3 years' time. Currently, I'm 57. So I would like to continue to work until 65 or 70, then really retire, right? Of course, I will retire in 3 years' time, and I would like to travel to China, to Middle East, to Europe, to America, Canada, Australia, to experience the exotic foreign life and enjoy the exotic scenes and enjoy the foreign foods and relax. And I will have my wife with me. If she refuses, maybe I will find a good companion to travel with, and we would enjoy the life together, right? So I hope when I retire, by the time when I retire, the America regains its composure, prosperous economy, right, and good cooperation with Korea. And I would like to find some opportunity to reside in America for 1 to 3 years. Then I would come back to Korea, right? No problem. I don't want to be an American citizen anymore. I don't have any desire for that. Thanks for listening, but as with other occasion, let's go back and see what I try to remember. Subversion, rationalize, purges and crackdowns, rationalize, purges and crackdowns, rationalize, purges and crackdowns. What begins as language hardens into law and law into violence. What begins as language hardens into law and law into violence. Trump's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful, but unpopular. Trump's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful but unpopular. For example, Erdogan's authoritarian theater is not only unlawful but unpopular. Right? Trumpism, collapsing the distinction between political opposition and actual violent threat, right? Collapsing the distinction between actual political opposition and actual violent threat. Collapsing the distinction between political opposition and actual violent threat. When that language is paired with real deployments, it becomes more than insult. It is a recipe for treating fellow Americans as enemy combatants. It's a recipe for treating fellow Americans as enemy combatants, collapsing the distinction between political opposition and actual violent threat. When that language is paired with real troop deployments, it becomes more than insult. It becomes more than insult. It is a recipe for treating fellow Americans as enemy combatants. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening and have a great Monday. Bye bye.